What's going on? Just want to do a short comparison video. I'm going to keep throwing out videos whenever I have a few minutes to make them and a little effort to put into to making things cool, hopefully. Anyways, I just wanted to do a couple of comparisons between two speakers that I actually think are quite similar. I know their price isn't quite similar, but as far as their specs and their possible applications, I think these two speakers are really similar, at least on paper. In practice, there's a lot of things that are quite different, and that's mostly what I'm going to talk about. So this is actually getting easier to do because over the last month, I've been building this little listening room. It's way too small in the sense that it's only about 7.5 by 11 feet with a sloping ceiling, as you can see. But that said, I've put some effort into treating it and really optimizing my seating position. So the reason I bring this up is I have to say that I haven't listened to the Emotivas since I started putting this room together. I listened to them in an untreated room, but since I've done the treatments, it's absolutely amazing how much better they make the Emotivas. Now they obviously make the XSA Vanguards, the Vanguards better as well. But again, just noting that I really hadn't had the perspective, and that perspective is kind of shocking because both speakers sound really good. They are quite different, especially with certain types of music. But I just want to give a little credit to the Emotivas for being this good. And just want to note how much the room really impacted it. It improved them in every way. So anyways, yeah, just a quick look at the room. So these are just acoustic panels. These are the 3.5 inch GIK panels, 1, 2, and 3. And then there's a 7 1/3 panel back here. It's like a quote bass trap. And then I have this sort of like acoustic tile, which I don't think is worth a whole lot, but it looks cool. And then the corner absorbers are homemade bass traps. They're like 12 inches deep, 16 inches wide, and are overstuffed with rock wool, with a little bit of diffusion. And then other than that, carpeted floor, and my listening position is really optimized. So obviously I was concerned about boominess and bass. And then obviously first and second reflections and wall bounce and all that. So I've tried to minimize that. I don't really know what I'm doing, but whatever I have done in here has certainly made things a lot better. So anyways, just want to talk about the differences here, the biggest differences in this room, which is, again, a really small room. I listened to both just now, about 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8 tracks, and mostly tracks that I thought the XSAs wouldn't do that well on. The things the XSAs do, in my opinion, better than most speakers I've heard is jazz. Jazz can be tough in regards to getting the timbre right on certain instruments. They're not bass heavy, but the bass that they do have is textured and has a lot of detail and very much different than pop bass. So I didn't listen to a whole lot of jazz on these two speakers. I just get the sense that I'll do that in a different review. I think the XSAs are going to come out ahead in jazz. There's just certain things that I know they do well after listening to them, and jazz is one of them. I don't listen to enough classical to really give a great bit of feedback, but I'll make some notes on that as well. They're being driven by a really low cost, but a pretty impressive front end. It's just a Weem Mini streaming Amazon HD. So the Weem Mini streaming Amazon HD into topping E30 DAC and a SMSL A300 Class D amp. I know that better front end is going to make a big difference ultimately, but pretty happy. And I also want to note that the noise floor in this room is really, really low. My phone app is saying about 29 decibels at rest, and I don't know how accurate that is, but it's friggin' quiet in here. So, again, the sub was turned off. Just a little look back at what's going on. Nothing fancy. So yeah. So I did not listen to them stacked like this, obviously. I would just switch one for the other. The stands and the little isoacoustic stands are centered. So when I switched them, I checked them. Everything was identical for the most part. I didn't mess around with toe in much. I basically kept them toed in basically like this, which is pointed basically directly at the listening position. So it's pretty much 100% on axis. So I kept them the same for both. Again, no subwoofer, no filters, port plugs open on the Emotivas, and the Vanguards are sealed, so there's nothing to do there, and the grills were off. So tried to keep everything as simple as possible, and I would listen to one song, noting a couple things in particular, and then switch back and forth. And ultimately, I probably came up with, I don't know exactly how many, but a few things that really stand out between the two speakers. So starting at bass, the texture and detail from the Vanguards is higher, but the sort of punchiness and sort of very pleasant with pop music type bass. I don't know. I think the Emotivas have more of that sort of punchy bass, but I don't think that the quantity is actually that different between the two speakers in this room, which again is optimized to minimize booming bass. And my position is actually such that I don't have much boom at all. I wanted to be able to tune the bass with the subwoofer, and believe it or not, it seems to work pretty well. So either way, at the listening position, both speakers do pop bass quite well, but the Emotivas definitely have more of that sort of punchy attack, and the XSA have a bass, especially that sort of like pop kick drum and the pop, that have a bit more texture and a bit more kind of like juiciness, thickness, less attack, but a little bit more sustain. I'd say the mid-range, I'm not going to talk a ton about the mid-range quality, because I think that's kind of where the XSA is in its element. The Emotiva is known to be a little recessed in the mid-range, a bit of a V-curve speaker, very gentle, but a V-curve speaker. And the XSA is kind of the opposite. It's a mid-range forward speaker, and there's no doubt that that's clear. And the highs are quite recessed on the Vanguard. They exist, but they're definitely more in the background. Extremely low sibilance, whereas the Emotivas are quite well known for that, the ribbon tweeter, and definitely have, I think, a really nice high-end, much more revealing, certainly brighter, certainly more sibilance. I was listening to the song Sway by, this version is done by Diana Krall, and that song has a good amount of sibilance. She doesn't have a ton in typical, but this song, I have been listening to the Vanguard for a while, and haven't really noticed any sibilance, but listening on the Emotivas, same song, definitely quite a bit more sibilant. And her voice sounds a bit fuller, richer, and deeper on the XSA, in a way that I think is ultimately quite nice. So, one of the issues that the XSAs have had for me in regards to, again, this is a critique that is not really warranted, but certain songs, certain types of music don't seem to go that well. And having an A-B comparison, now that I'm more familiar with the Vanguards, has been helpful. So, I listened to 2 songs by Tool, which I know really well. I listened to Laterallus and The Pot, both, Ultra HD renditions. And I listened to the drums quite a bit, and then the overall dynamics and attack from the guitar. Those are some things that really stand out to me. The recordings from Tool tend to also have quite a bit of sort of like 3-dimensional ambiance. The way they record their music, you'll get stuff that kind of bounces left to right, up and down. Both speakers did that pretty well. Because there's more extended and more clear high end on the Emotivas, any effects that happen in the high end, you get much more of from the Emotivas. Any effects that happen sort of in the mid-range, you get more of from the Vanguards. So none of that should be too surprising, but it's definitely worth noting. I actually liked both tracks pretty similarly, although they are quite different from each speaker. One of the big sort of things that people like about the BBC style monitor is the long listening sessions. It's not fatiguing. And I can definitely appreciate that more now than I used to be able to, especially in a room like this where you hear everything and you don't need a lot of volume to get a lot of detail. I think that really helps the Vanguards, because that lack of treble is less of an issue, because you can really hear, you can still hear it. It's smoothed out, it's a bit more recessed, but you can still pick up on it. In certain environments, I'm not sure if that would be a bigger issue. But again, small room, relatively low volumes. I was sort of averaging in the mid 60s, peaks probably in the low 70s, and that's about as loud as I'll listen to in here. I will say a little bit higher volumes would probably push the XSA Vanguard into an even higher class. They do tend to open up and give you even more detail at the higher levels, but that's really true of most speakers, and it doesn't really matter too much because my environment requires low levels regardless. So anyways, I like both tracks from both speakers. I think that I was level adjusting as well. The Vanguards are, I think, 84 dB sensitive, and the Emotivas are 86. That's on paper, but in practice, that felt pretty similar. So I have my stereo, my volume at 23 for the XSAs, and for the Emotivas, it was at 20. So I just kept going back and forth on the volumes and checked it a few times. The dB levels were similar. So anyways, yeah, so I will say that this is probably the biggest difference overall between the two speakers is the way they image. I think both speakers have a similar size soundstage. I think the Vanguards are probably a little bit bigger overall. They go a little wider with a bit more confidence, probably a little taller. I can't really say much on the depth. I don't feel like I get a whole lot of depth in this room. I would need to listen to a little more jazz where I can really place instruments. So the tracks I was listening to, I can't really say there was a huge difference in overall depth with sort of instrument placement. But here's the thing that the XSA does that's kind of its real party trick. And it wasn't as apparent until I put them next to, a well-regarded speaker of a similar size, is the way they not only lock in the center image, but push the center image towards you is quite striking. So that affects the soundstage quite a bit. And again, I was looking for tracks that I knew well, but didn't necessarily love on the Vanguards. And then I also listened to a couple that kind of I know the Vanguards do well, like that Diana Krall track. Her vocals are just amazing. They're very centered. That's true on any system. She's pretty easy to make sound good, but again, just having the sort of the timbre of her voice change, and then where she was located on the soundstage. So much more information happens in the center of the soundstage, so sort of like in this area, left to right, with the Vanguards. It's almost as if, imagine if you had a center channel and you turned it up. That's the effect that you get with the Vanguards. They put so much information in the center in comparison to the Emotivas. And I think that's probably, if you like that effect, and I really do, I think that's kind of their biggest magic trick in sort of this sort of like blow you away fashion, is they put voices and anything in the center so far forward. It's really the opposite of recessed. I don't think it's in a way that's like artificial, but I think when you A/B it against a speaker that doesn't do that, you really get a good sense of how well it does that. Now, again, the room has impacts on that, and, your mileage may vary, etc. But that really is the thing that I think the Vanguards do extremely well, is they create a huge, very focused center image. And then what's cool about that is for certain types of music, you're going to get stuff happening off to the sides. It really does help the speakers disappear, in the sense that it's like there's more information coming from the center than there is from the left and right. Now, again, if you have a song where like certain jazz tracks, everything will be coming from the right speaker, basically, and that still happens. It's not like it shifts to the center. But where there is information in the center, it's going to just lock in, and you're going to get information kind of not sprinkled, but it's going to be on your left and right and in between that center. Whereas with the Emotivas, you get much more sort of like, you can hear the speakers more information coming from the left and right, simply because in comparison, there's less information coming from the center. So in that Krall track, they still produce a locked-in center image. It's nothing like they don't on tracks that have a great center image. They still do it perfectly. But the weight of that center image is just so great on the Vanguards. So I think that's about all I'm going to say right now. I'll say just a moment about dynamics. I think both speakers in this room do pretty well. I think you get a little bit more overall. No, I don't. I think both speakers attack a little differently. The Emotivas attack more in the high end, not surprisingly. So you'll get a little bit more shimmer and attack from the cymbals. Definitely more cymbals, which can be good and bad. I think they could definitely be a much more fatiguing speaker, particularly if you're listening to information where you have a lot of high end. And then the Vanguards attack much more in the mid-range. Again, that's not surprising. But so if you have like a guitar with a lot of grunge, you'll get that grunge push forwards with less of the harshness that you might get with certain types of distortion. So I don't think they're the best rock speakers. I haven't blown my socks off. But rock doesn't have a lot of the stuff in it that I think the Vanguards do perfectly. I think the Vanguards reproduce piano in a way that's really amazing. Because they're smooth and on the darker side of neutral, they do horns really well. I love jazz trumpet, but it can be grating. On brighter speakers, jazz trumpet can just be too much. One of the downsides is you get less ride cymbal on most tracks. So if you have a track that has a relatively recessed ride cymbal, you're not going to get as much clarity from the ride, especially from like the bell and pings, and certainly from crash cymbals, less shimmer. So there's trade-offs like anything else, but hopefully that gives you some more information on these speakers. I got to be honest that these Emotivas, I paid shipped like $220 for them. Even at $400, they're just really good. And the XSAs have been great. I like them more the more time I spend with them. I'll do more comparisons. I have a set of larger Polk LSIM 703s, which probably won't make sense in this room, but I'll probably get them in here and do a comparison at some point. But yeah, so hopefully that was helpful. And I will say probably the biggest takeaway from the last couple of months experimenting here is how important the room is. This is a suboptimal room, but with setting my position, getting the speakers away from the walls, getting the treatment in the room, and experimenting quite a bit, I'm really blown away with how good this room sounds. And again, all of this is coming from like a front end that's like under $500. So, so anyways, hopefully, again, that was helpful. And any questions, leave them in the comments. Thanks, guys.